G'day legends, I hope you're having a great day and so far you are having a fantastic week. Now legends, of course, as always, we do have a lot to go over. So we're going to be looking at the maps and a number of geolocations as well, see where things are shifting around, also talk about some commanders who have been let go from their positions. In this, we'll also clarify the position just northeast of Pokrovsk, where we saw that Russian breakthrough occur. There's a lot of claims around what is actually happening here, and with everything, we just need to take a breath, give it time, and see what is actually occurring there, as all the usual suspects are making some massive claims today. So we'll look at that and we'll keep you updated into the future. We also need to look at the utter hypocrisy coming out of the coalition of the Unwilling. We know that there's a lot more these European states could be doing to either help Ukraine or to sanction Russia. First and foremost, buying billions of dollars worth of resources isn't, I guess, the best way to try and impact the economy. We're going to look at Trump's ultimatum. We spoke about this yesterday. Look, I'm ready to go if you guys are ready to go. We need to look at one of the key players in this is India. The other key player is China. And China has much more power in international affairs than I think a lot of people actually consider. I think they're stuck 3 decades ago, not in 2025. And European leaders, they know this, and the whatever it takes isn't whatever it takes. And then just in the end, I need to look at an answer that Mr. Keith Kellogg, Trump's special envoy to Ukraine, gave, and how I just think Keith and the rest of the administration are just on vastly different tacks to what they actually see in this war. So let's start on the maps. Now, of course, we come on to this. This is the deep state Ukrainian map. We have, of course, Kyiv in the center, red areas occupied since 22, purple since 2014, red check, ground that Russia has made over 24 hours, blue check, Ukraine over 24 hours. Now, before we get stuck into the actual map itself, there's been a license agreement update for deep state. And a lot of people in my position are a bit concerned about this, don't really understand what is going on. Now, I've translated this across, and this is the way that I read it: that visual material, screenshot, cropped images, photos, or copied material from deep state map may be freely used for both commercial or non-commercial purposes if they contain either deep state logo, text attribution, or a direct link to the site rights holder. Now, what I will say is we've always include or not ever purposely cropped out any watermarks from anyone, and we always say this is the deep state map through a verbal attribution. So I think that we are fully in line with all of this. It's definitely actually under copyright law, well within free use and media, but I hope other YouTubers see this and have that idea. I did a little bit of digging. Now, impacting the battlefield, we do know, of course, the battlefield is made up of soldiers through to commanders. And we see this article coming out, and there's a few ways to look at this. Now, Ukraine's commander-in-chief dismisses 2 core commanders. This is from, of course, Mr. Sursky. Dismissed this Volodymyr Zelenko and Maxim Kutachin. Now, both commanders were removed from their posts about a week or 2 ago. According to the sources, Sursky's decisions are connected with the loss of positions in the Corps' area of responsibility. Ukrainian forces recently lost the village of Kamyanske and part village of Plavne. So let's actually have a look. That's right down in here. So we have, of course, Plavne and Kamyanske, which does appear to be under control here, and in areas in Donetsk where the Russians managed to advance into Dnipropetrovsk Oblast, where these commanders lost their jobs. Now, what I will say about this, something I've been talking about a lot, is this no-step-back policy that the senior Ukrainian command have, and ending up in these pockets from Pokrovsk, Konstantinivka to Bakhmut to Avdiivka to Velika to you name it, it's been there. And a lot of this and other decisions, when we actually listen to commanders or soldiers talking from the field, as saying that they're influenced through not being sacked or getting some sort of reprisal by doing what they feel on the battle and not following these direct orders of hold no matter what. And this is one of the major reasons for losing the attritional war currently, and a major source of catastrophic morale that we do see. And like I've been saying, you can absolutely win an attritional war without ever advancing on the battlefield. But this hold in place, we've seen unveil catastrophe after catastrophe after catastrophe. But there's another side to this. Everyone I speak to, from soldiers to military analysts to ex-commanders that I knew, they all unilaterally think that Ukraine needs to promote the mid-level wartime commanders and purge the peacetime senior bureaucratic commanders. That mid-level who's actually fought, actually led troops, they all need to step up and replace all of that upper echelon. So a few different ways, I guess, that can be presented. Now, let's specifically look at the maps, and we're going to go across the east, and we'll look in here. This is Pokrovka Falls, the pocket here, and then we see Kushnev Yar, Zolotokola Yar, where Russia did at one point push up to 20 kilometers past, but hasn't managed to exploit and expand that. And we've spoken at length about the concern if you can't expand and desaturate, then enemy fires onto your positions. Now, today we see a tiny bit of clarification on just the southern edge here and Ukrainian positions in Volodymyrivka. Now, many different mappers, bloggers, propagandists, advocates, analysts, whatever you'd like to call them, they are saying there's like a triple encirclement happening in here. That said, the actual information coming out of here at the moment is severely limited. Severely limited. So what we're going to look at is Mr. Playfair, who did a fantastic job on this, who has been doing a great job on this, pro-Ukrainian source. He has given us a breakdown of what is happening in here, and you can just see the mess of this. Now, I've put some black arrows on some areas you may be familiar with, of Zolotokola Yar, Kushnev Yar, Shakhovka, Novotoretsk, into areas that you may need to know, even down to Novokonomachny at the very base of this area too. So you may get a better idea from this map of actually how this looks. But we're going to talk through his slide on the Dobropilia direction. This is this area. The situation in this direction reaches an unprecedented level of confusion as both sides continue maintaining strict operational security policies after more than 2 months. And these Twitter users don't know better than the MODs at the point. And at this point in time, even a lot of the commanders on the ground probably don't know the exact layout of what's happening. In picture number 1, which is this one here, you can see an attempt at the most precise representation possible of the situation without having access to private army maps and without recurring to painting the whole salient in the grey zone, as it's effectively how it acts as. But here's a summary. In general, the Ukrainian forces currently possess the initiative, but the Russians are fighting back and trying to advance toward Kushnev Yar and from Kushnev Yar to Zolotokola Yar, crossing Ukrainian obstacle lines belonging to the new Donbass line. So we'll show you this as we go through. So, of course, we have Kushnev Yar, Zolotokola Yar's main Donbass line. So trying to push to here and then continue to push, but also unlock forces that may be effectively encircled or cut off in here also. Ukrainian forces recaptured parts of northern, central and southern Novokonomachny, but fighting is still going on there and not everything is consolidated. So we have Novokonomachny down the bottom here, just out from Minograd, the very base of this. Ukrainian forces are attempting a triple encirclement of Russian forces near Kushnev Yar, Mayak, and Zapyvny, and between Novotoretsk and Boykivka. So, of course, Kushnev Yar, where Mayak is sitting, and then further at the base as well. This area, Zatashok, is currently in grey zone with the Ukrainians trying to push the Russians out of the village. Same goes for this area here, Zapyvny, and the situation is dynamic. Both sides' counterattacking positions constantly change hands. Russian forces are trying to take back the initiative at Novoshakovka, for the fighting is ongoing, Ivanivka and Vilna. So if we bring this back up, we're looking more on the western side of here. So we have Novoshakovka, Vilna, where the Russians are trying to hold initiative on this area and push to the west. The Russian forces are trying to link back up with their encircled contingent trapped in Kushnev Yar, which is itself trying to break out at the same time, advancing northwards to Zolotokola Yar and Vesely, but were repelled. It's very likely because of the terrible supplies and the new Donbass line. So in these areas, in Kushtiv Yar, we're trying to reach into Vilny, Zlotsko Diaz, both unlock and lock positions in here and hold and exploit still. Again, if you're confused, yeah, it's a very, very confusing situation. It's not as simple as these knobs just putting circles on maps and going, this is exactly what it looks like. Russian forces continue trying to attack Shakhovka, reportedly having small successes at the same time the Ukrainians entered Mayak and recaptured Pankivka. So we bring this back up. We look, of course, for Shakhovka. We're talking then on the eastern side of this, so Shakhovka, as the Ukrainians push in Mayak. So you need to remember there's another envelopment happening in here. So there may be the quote triple encirclement people are talking about, but there is another envelopment in here also. Novotoretsk saw a Ukrainian entry with the current situation unknown. That's around the base. Ukrainian forces attack in Volodymyrivka towards Kopteve, attempting a fourth encirclement out of the salient. Please remember the situation changes every hour in this area, and every source you look at claims different things. You can see in the direction of Koptove in here. But again, as Mr. Playford says, it changes very quickly, and a lot of sources are claiming very different things. Again, I know everyone wants the most up-to-date what is exactly happening, but we need to say with a lot of this, we don't really know. The funniest thing that I see is people talking about the severity of being surrounded on three sides. And yes, this is absolutely severe, but what they won't do is they will not apply that logic, the pros and cons of this, to any other area, even just move 5 kilometers to the south. So I will keep you updated on exactly what is happening here. Now let's move up the map, and of course we have this whole Terny-Siversk front, and you can see on this map in the direction of Serebryanka and as well in the direction of Yampil that Russia is making some ground in here, and I do have multiple maps to show you in this direction today. So Suryak maps, he's showing more ground being made through than the Kremenar Forest directly in this area too. So that gives us a better idea of what is happening as well. Mr. AMK, he shows movement in these areas too. Of course, moving through this forest, this has been one of the most substantial updates that we have got over the past months, especially with how quickly it fell after being held without any movement for a number of years. But then let's talk about just to the north of here, and we call this the Terny front. But of course, this is all building onto Liman, and this is eventually going to be used to exploit Sloviansk and Kramatorsk. These are very important areas. So let's work through the AMK maps. In the Liman direction, Russian forces continue general push south toward Liman. Russian forces advance a wide front from Kolodyazy to Derelove. So if we zoom in down in here, we look for Derelove and in the as well the direction out from Kolodyazy. So we can zoom just down in here. We see Dobrasheve, Derelove sits just down in here. We can see a lot of grey zone in here and Kolodyazy. So this whole southern front is pushing down to the south. Now, you and I, we didn't predict this, but we said it makes sense for Russia to do this. Unlike what is happening on the Kucherov Yar Pokrovsk front we just showed you, you need to expand this to desaturate the fires back against for further exploitation. Now, let's look further on. It's still the same frontline area, but just to the west here, the Borova direction, Russian and Ukrainian forces have both advanced. So some areas you will be familiar with. So this is the area we're talking, Serezhny and Karpivka. So we can see the Russian forces have exploited to the west of Serezhny here, but also around Karpivka that Ukrainian forces have taken back some ground. We have spoken about how critical this is because from Karpivka to the Oskil in here is the only opening for this whole Borova area that can create a kill box. Now, last one in here, and this is more on this Ternay frontline area just down in here. Sorry, my map freaks out all the time. Russian forces continue to advance in and around Zadashny and made additional progress towards connecting their bridgehead to the Liman front, improved their position south of Kolodyazy, and have cleared the rest of Zadashny. So if we zoom in on here, we get Zadashny pop up, clearing through these areas, and as well down from Kolodyazy. Let me show you this map. So in the Kolodyazy area and Zadashny too, and eventually this will be meeting up with what we're seeing through the Kremenar forest on the Yampil direction that we see moving confirmed on this map. So this front line in here, absolutely take notice of this. And you can see this sort of larger overall envelopment around Sloviansk, Kramatorsk. Now that's not enveloped, but you can see where the Russian forces are trying to push at the moment. Now, let's move our way up into Kupiansk, somewhere we have seen moving a lot, and of course, that tunnel operation that has led a lot of logistics and men into this area. Suryak's map today. Last 5 days, Russia made new advances in some of the northwestern districts in here, so moving through Kupiansk very slowly, but wait out to see what is actually happening on here. This is a very, very dangerous area. We'll continue moving our way down. We just have a small bit of ground being made around Horakove. Other maps have shown this for some time. And then we come to the Velika Novosilka front line, where there's a healthy surface of grey zone, and even that grey zone, probably beyond that, is still red at this point in time. A little bit around Beresove, a little bit around Lvivkia today, but Ternove and other areas we've seen flags go up, still not being shown on this map. But let's look in the north around Velika today, Zeleny Hay, that the Russians have continually expanded beyond then Zeleny Hay and Iskra, according to Suryak. So this is Iskra, this is Zeleny Hay, so in this area and beyond as well. And then we do have one flag going up with just a minor shift outside of what is considered grey or red zone. We have Olehivsky. Really, this is actually on the Huliapol front line here. We do see this Russian flag, and then we do have this geolocation just outside of where the grey zone is sitting there. Again, we use geolocations to try and give something else's perspective to the maps that we've got. Okay, the maps will in time become far less unclear, and then we'll start clearing up. So let's have a look at this Le Monde article. Sanctions against Russia, a bone of contention between the US and Europe in the face of China. Before ratcheting up pressure on Putin, Trump is demanding that his European allies stop buying Russian oil and increase tariffs on Chinese products. This is unacceptable to the EU, which is due to present a 19th package of measures on Monday and fears paying the price of a trade war between Washington and Beijing. It risks further straining relations between China, Moscow's partner, and the old continent due to American president's demand amid the war in Ukraine and heightened trade tensions between Beijing and Washington. Again, this is a lose-lose for Europe, of energy, of trade, of partners, but it can be a win-win for America. We'll go over this in a second. Now, since returning to the White House, Trump has been hesitant to adopt new reprisals against Russia despite insistent demands from European capitals, which sees the way to force Moscow to end the war in Ukraine. And it's become that the only way to force Moscow is through China and India not then buying Russian product. Now, Trump has said, I'm ready to take significant sanctions against Russia from the moment all NATO countries have also decided to do so and when all NATO countries have stopped buying oil from Russia. We'll impose customs duties of 50 to 100% on China, so secondary sanctions and tariffs. And he wants the European partners to meet these conditions. Now, on September the 4th, all states mobilised in support of Ukraine would cease all imports of oil and gas from Beijing. This is what Trump was speaking about, which is largely contributing to short-circuiting the Western reprisals imposed on Russia since the invasion of Ukraine in 2022. And this is exactly what we have spoken about, is Europe is buying more product from Russia than money they're actually giving to Europe. And if you're meant to be the coalition of the willing and saying whatever it takes, well, Trump is saying this is what it's going to take. In Europe, these demands are not going down well. The 27 are not about to accept the conditions set by the White House tenant regarding increased custom duties on Chinese imports. This doesn't mean we shouldn't take measures, but for the moment, no exorbitant custom duties, assures one European diplomat. I don't see Europeans aligning with Trump against China. This is from Judges Stephanie Baumann, Director of the Centre of International Research and Sciences, PO. It's very complicated for Europeans to trust Washington in their relations with Beijing. It would even be terrible if our policy towards China depended on the US. The EU fears paying the price of a trade war between Washington and Beijing by serving as a dumping ground for Chinese products. It also does not intend to deprive itself of Chinese market in the name of sanctions against Russia, saying the European objective is to impose severe sanctions on Russian economy, targeting direct or indirect trade with Moscow, but not further weaken our economy. What I will say to this official is so far that hasn't worked. Trump knows that is not working, and over time is actually working less, and that what is left is these secondaries if you want to have an effect or start talking. Another European source believes Trump realises that he cannot attack China alone and needs us to unite, but he's not yet forcing us to take action. The coalition, the willing, becoming the unwilling, of course, this rhetoric for as long as it takes, whatever it takes, as long as it's not actually this. With these demands, the American president is seeking, according to European source, to confront the EU with its contradictions. It's a way of showing that the US is willing while the EU would block. On their part, that's extremely clever. The EU will not budge. Making their custom duties against China unconditional on ours amounts to ensuring they do nothing. And this is the win-win for Washington I've spoken about. This position applies to India, which is currently negotiating a free trade agreement with Brussels, which is seen as a countermeasure after the increase in US custom duties on European products. Brussels does not intend to impose custom duties on India. That would be against our interests. And you can see, I criticise Trump so much, but you can see the annoyance at the contradiction in this, that you're saying we need to impact the Russian economy. You're saying, well, the way to do it now is you guys need to stop buying anything from there, and we also need to impact China and India, Russia's two biggest trading partners, and oh shit, we're not doing that. But we'll do anything else that it takes. We'll make a Facebook post. We'll send Kaya Kallas to fucking spit some nonsense. But this is the problem. This is where it's a win-win for Washington. It either, if the European partners agree to this, it further increases Europe as a vassal borrowing state of the US, just to borrow and borrow and borrow. It further increases that. And what it does, though, is if the Europeans stop buying from India and China and Russia, is it slows the rise of competitors for the US, being China, and of course increases the power balance or decreases the balancing power of India. So that's a win for Washington if they pull it off. If they don't pull it off, then European partners, as I speculated yesterday, I think Trump doesn't actually want to pull this off. It gives Washington, I guess, a way out of what is seemingly endless of this conflict at the moment. And what will happen is they won't leave fully. The Europeans will still buy a hell of a lot from America. That won't cost Americans. There'll be billions and billions of European money spent in the military-industrial complex, as well as loans taken into the US and money flowing into the US. And potentially it could reopen American trade with Russia too, because we've spoken about trying to draw Russia away from China strategically for the US as well. You can see how America, I don't know, I think there might be a bit of backwards politics in this. Russia's share of oil imports has fallen from 26% to 3% thanks to the implementation starting in 2022 of an embargo on Russian petroleum products from which Hungary and Slovakia are exempt. Regarding gas, Russia's share is expected to be 30% this year, 45% in 2022, and by 2027 not a single drop of LNG would reach Europe. We'll see it. I'll believe it when I see it. That said, a shitload is still coming through that was crude to somewhere else, refined product into Europe. But the actual, or the way they measure that, it doesn't include it from there. But all of this has just been sold into other nations, India, China. Now, European diplomat, we want to further reduce these imports, but two countries still consume Russian oil, Hungary, Slovakia. No, a lot of countries consume Russian oil. You just don't call it Russian oil. The actual oil, its origin was Russia, but it's just been refined somewhere else. We've alerted the Americans, but they are not reacting. Fumes, another European official, pointing to closeness to these two European states. So, nothing's more common than a European leader just fuming about something and having real measures that could be taken. For its part, China has leverage to ensure Europe does not fall into line behind the US. Both German car manufacturers and French luxury and aerospace groups need the Chinese market. It would suddenly close in the event of 100% tariffs. look at someone who's Chinese, see how much they love Louis Vuitton or Audi or Mercedes, or all of these manufacturers completely rely the other way too on getting shit made there for cheap. We'll talk about rare metals in a second. Beijing also has strong partners with the union itself who will be able to argue in its favour, include Orban and Fico. The latter was among 26 heads of state who went to the Beijing parade and demonstration of China's new power. Again, yeah, these are relationships, but I tell you, those big car manufacturers, those luxury houses, LVMH, all of that, that's going to have a hell of a lot of pull into the governments and bottom line economies. Now, this is from TASS, but we're going to use, of course, the quotes from this. China will respond firmly if NATO countries impose tariffs over Russian oil purchases. Trying to pressure the EU, the US, trying to get them to pull away, that they're saying is a typical example of unilateral intimidation and economic coercion. An attempt to impose tariffs on China under the pretext of its purchase of Russian oil, Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesman Li Jian has said, China's normal trade, economic and energy cooperation with countries around the world, including Russia, is lawful and raises no objections. He's commented on the possibility of tariffs being imposed by the G7 and NATO countries on China for importing oil, saying, in the event that China's legitimate rights and interests are violated, we will take decisive countermeasures. We will firmly defend our sovereignty, security, and development interests. And India, we saw when Trump even put in the sanctions on India, the further secondaries, India, who is much, much closer to the West than China is, much less powerful than China is in all senses, that they said no as well. And we have spoken about secondaries are a direct impingement on a nation's sovereignty and particularly in energy on their interest as well, especially of nations with over 1 billion people like India. China's diplomat specified that the actions of the US trying to put pressure on the European Union are typical of a unilateral intimidation and economic coercion. He noted Washington is thereby seriously undermining international trade rules and threatening the security and the stability of global production and supply chains. Now, China has massive leverage here. Massive leverage on the US, massive leverage on the European and Australian markets too. The amount of manufacturing that is completely reliant on China is crazy. The amount of importing cheap product from China, crazy. Look around wherever you're watching this video right now. On a more strategic but economic sense too, is the rare earths, the galanium, the germanium, the antimony, the graphite. And this will have immediate pain for any Western high tech, any defense, from bullets to night vision goggles to renewables, from solar panels to electric vehicles, all of this too, right at the time when these countries are trying to go green, this immediately has huge pain. And you know, the pain is now that all the chips have been put into the green, shutting down power stations, both nuclear and coal and etc., going that way, if that gets shut down, immediate pain problems. More than 80% of drone parts that are in Ukrainian drones, are from China. DJI through to the parts you build FPVs with. All of your export sectors as well, so you're tapping into a market of 1.5 billion people from Australia. I know wine and beef and seafood is massive, but then all agriculture and massive luxury goods, luxury houses too. By house, I mean like things like Gucci or Louis Vuitton or any of those. And of course, this gives, I think most critically, the further incentive to de-dollarize, de-euroize cementing bricks, because the dollar or the euro or the pound is being weaponized for a war that you are not directly involved in. China is far less involved in the war in Ukraine than America or Europe is. China may be giving some aid to Russia. They may be buying off Russia. There may be some parts rocking up. But what we're not seeing is we're not seeing Chinese fighter jets in the sky. We're not seeing Chinese tanks there. If you're going to say that China's involved in this, which to some point is true, we are more involved than that. Okay? And the weaponization of currencies, economies, the dollar, the euro, the pound, and the other way, the ruble or the renminbi, you can see where this goes and why there's incentivization to move away from this. This is why Europe, who act like realists in international affairs, not like the liberals they act more democratically or publicly, domestically or publicly, this is why we don't see them taking that $300 billion and spending it, because the hundreds of billions of dollars that someone like China or India, whoever, has tied up in euros or pounds or dollars or whatever, may go, fuck that, we're moving it out and we're moving to a different economy, just like we've seen China allowing Russia to buy panda bonds, so to buy bonds in renminbi. Now, China, they will not and they cannot, they've said this, it's clear as day, let Russia collapse. Now, firstly, no state wants a rump nuclear power on its border. No state wants that. Europe doesn't want that either. Europe would not have ever, we've said this, they gave enough to stall the Russians, never enough to win, because they don't want that either. And China, they definitely don't want that. Now, secondly, of why they won't do this is it's cheaper. Russia is of great strategic interest to China. It is resource rich, of resources becoming more and more valuable into the future. It's energy rich. It's a huge producer of food, provides huge access to the sea, and it holds certain knowledge that is very useful to China, especially around the Arctic, both in resource and knowledge, around nuclear propulsion, high efficiency jet engines, but also knowledge in war, especially conventional attritional type war. For China, Russia serves as a useful power balancer as well. This is why I've said as well, Russia can be useful as a balancer. This is why I don't think that Russia's going to be stuck out of international politics from the West for very long, because it can be balanced the other way. But it also, China, it can be used, Russia can be used as a physical barrier between NATO themselves. If there was a Russian collapse and then NATO was to move through that way, or say, China doesn't want then a Western-friendly nation right on that border either. And the other way, we don't want China right up on that border too. Again, international politics, regardless of how people say, it does act outside of your typical liberal progressivism that we see, and acting like realists and real politics and taking into account real power too. The last thing anyone wants is China on this border here, or China doesn't want then West on their northern border along Mongolia too. That they cannot, and no one wants a massive nuclear rump state either. Now, speaking about the US, it seems like a lot of the US administration is in line with each other, that yes, this is what is currently happening, but the special envoy to Ukraine, we've said this before, Mr. Keith Kellogg, he seems to be the one who's sitting outside of where Trump or Vance or Witkoff or Rubio are. So just listen to this in this interview in Ukraine.
Putin thinks Russia is winning. His definition of winning and my definition of winning are absolutely two different things. If he was winning, he'd be in Kyiv. If he was winning, he'd be west of the Dnieper River. If he was winning, he'd be in Odessa.
Wrong. If he had won, that may be there. But who is winning is ongoing. One is final. Russia is winning on the battlefield by any measurable metric at the moment that you would like. Ground, not a great metric, but yeah, attrition, highly, highly likely. Politically, and this movement away with China and India and everyone, I'd say there too.
If he was winning, he would have changed the government. Russia is, in fact, losing this war. Now, they may make movements. It seems like
but he doesn't give any reason for why they are losing this war other than these maximalist goals that, well, one, the war is not over yet, and some of these goals were fabricated somewhat as well around movement all the way to then the western foremost areas.
In the Donbass region in the desk. But if you consider advancing moving by meters, not miles.
It's moving miles every day.
Well, then, okay, that's successful. But it's the cost of having, it's enormous. And I don't think people truly appreciate it's a number. But the numbers they have lost, when you're talking dead and wounded, well over 1 million. They left Afghanistan after losing 18,000.
Okay, this is where he skews this. Keith, if you're going to have the same numbers, do the same numbers. Well over 1 million. MIA, WIA, KIA. Okay then, Keith. You can't have that as a number and then compare it to a number of just KIA.
We left Vietnam after losing 65,000.
You left Vietnam with 65,000, yes? Tragically, America lost in a war that never needed to happen. America lost 65,000 people in Vietnam. Now, that is killed in action. It's killed in action. Let's go. There are 3 wounded to every 1 death. Russia has taken about, say, by that just metric, if you want to work on Keith's number here, 250,000 if you're working on that number. At least if you're going to do the numbers, at least have it evenly spread. Realistically, where does that figure sit? We don't really know. But you can't compare apples and oranges. You can't compare WIA, KIA, everything to just KIA. That is fucking stupid. It's like how the Ukrainian numbers released are liquidated. Wounded does not mean liquidated.
They've lost over 1 million dead or wounded. These numbers are World War II level numbers when you think about it.
They're not World War II level numbers, Keith. Have a look at what the Soviet Union lost in the Second World War. It's not even in the same wheelhouse, mate. You're talking 27 million dead.
They're stunning in the loss. And this is and their first line units that they came and tried to take Kyiv with a little over four years ago. Those first line units are gone. So they've gone through a second or a third or fourth iteration.
So it talks about these iterations of units going through.
The West just needs to push back and say, no, you're not. And I actually, the West just needs to push to kill them. And the Ukrainians are fighting valiantly on there. And so do I think the Russians are winning? Putin says it, and I think the West just needs to push back and say, no, you're not.
Okay, so do I think the Russians are winning? We just need to push back and say, no, you're not. That's not the fucking answer. That's not a fucking answer. Who is this knob jockey? Like, that's not an answer. You can't just say no. That is, what's that song? Caught me banging on the counter, it wasn't me. That's like the same argument to that. Maybe Keith is spitting fire.
And I actually, it's a great question because I was actually asked this question by the President Trump, in the Oval Office, probably 6 weeks ago.
And it goes on to appeal to higher authority of another guy saying the same thing. But again, I don't think Trump believes that, going from his quotes. I don't think any serious analyst at this point in time says Ukraine is winning. Now, some may say Russia is not winning. They definitely haven't won. Ukraine definitely hasn't won. But if you were to add up the metrics that we know on the battlefield, who has the upper hand in the initiative at the moment, I don't think any serious analyst is actually pushing back and saying that Russia does not have the initiative currently. If they didn't, why then would all the European diplomats be saying that Russia is trying to extend the war? When you're saying that, what you're saying is the longer this goes on, by holding the initiative, the better position that they are going to get into. This is what I think Keith, the American negotiating team, I don't know what's going on there, but he's on a very different track. Anyway, legends, look after yourselves. I'll speak to you tomorrow. Thank you. Bye-bye.